Welcome to Emtron Training Part 17. In this training tutorial, we're going to take a look at integrating a fuel pressure sensor into our Emtron to be able to compensate for fuel delivery based on our fuel pressure changing. There's a whole bunch of things we need to cover to understand this concept. Let's jump in so we can learn to work with a fuel pressure sensor. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at integrating a fuel pressure sensor into our Emtron. Fuel pressure is going to be one variable that can start to influence and change what the actual static flow of the injector is going to be. If the static flow of the injector changes as we're doing our tuning process, we'll find that we have an error that's going to be introduced into our fuel model. And the only way to be able to compensate for this is actually tracking what that fuel pressure is doing and using that to correct the injector pulse width. That's the purpose of a fuel pressure compensation. We're able to do that and integrate that here into our Emtron. It is going to improve our fuel modeling greatly because fuel pressure is always a variable that could potentially change at any given time within the fuel system, and we want to be able to track what it's doing, again, so we can integrate that here and make sure that our injector pulse width is always going to be tracking that and always going to be corrected for whatever that pressure is going to be doing. So what we're going to be doing here is taking a look at integrating a fuel pressure sensor into our Emtron here first, then talking about the concept of differential injector pressure. This is something that you may not have been familiar with. We're going to go over that concept here, and then we're going to move into looking at the differential injector pressure channel here in the Emtron and understanding how it works and watching a demonstration of seeing by going in and changing differential pressure as the engine's running, looking at the effect that it's going to have on the actual injector pulse width and just understanding that correlation and relationship just so we understand the importance of fuel pressure and integrating this into the Emtron. In my opinion, the fuel pressure sensor is going to be playing a vital role for any engine, so the fuel delivery is going to be ultra consistent and repeatable because, again, fuel pressure is one of those variables that is going to most likely become a problem at some point on your race vehicle or race engine, and we want to make sure that we're eliminating as many variables as possible. This allows us to count for this and track what it's doing. It gives us a safety net, so to speak. If we're in high boost situation with a turbo application, it can start to recorrect what the fuel injector pulse width is going to be, so we're delivering proper fuel. And it also allows us to spot trends within our fuel system as we're running it in racing conditions. We can see if we have a fuel pressure problem almost instantly looking at the differential fuel pressure, which is something we're going to be talking about and taking a look at here in this training tutorial. So we're going to be covering a whole bunch of different topics. Let's first go in here and let's look at how to integrate a fuel pressure sensor. Now, we've went over the idea of integrating pressure sensors into the Emtron in a separate training tutorial earlier in the training course, but we're going to be going over and taking a look at how to do the fuel pressure sensor integration here just from start to finish so you can see that process if you just skipped over the other videos. Again, so we're just very, very clear in this specific video on this topic. First thing I want to do is move from my tuning page right now, and I want to jump in here to config. And then under config, we're going to go into channels and then input setup. This is where we integrate the actual fuel pressure sensor, where we actually set it up. We look under input setup and we move down here to where my blue line here is highlighted. We see there's fuel pressure 1, fuel pressure 2. Now, in this case, I've worked with the channel fuel pressure 1, and that's where I've wired in and set up my fuel pressure sensor. Now, what's the note about this? If we're using the fuel pressure in our calculations for fuel, so if we're integrating this in, we need to have the fuel pressure 1 channel specifically used what we want to reference our fuel pressure at. We do not want to use fuel pressure 2 channel that will not be able to calculate the injector pressure differential, which is what we need to calculate properly in order to move forward going in and making this work properly with our Emtron. So fuel pressure 1 is what I've used. We have to make sure it's always on fuel pressure 1 channel. The next thing here, if we just double click, we can see that I've set my input source here under analog voltage 6. That's where I've wired the signal wire out of my fuel pressure sensor. So the fuel pressure sensor is mounted in the fuel pressure regulator. There's a spare port. That's where it's measuring the fuel pressure from. And we have 3 wires to the fuel pressure sensor. One wire is a 5-volt reference powered from my Emtron. And in fact, I've specified where that voltage reference is coming from. It's from my reference 1 5-volt from my ECU. Then I have a signal ground that's also tied into the Emtron. And then the output from the sensor is a 0 to 5 volt output, and that's tied into my analog voltage input 6 right here that I've designated. So that's how this is wired, that's how this is integrated. So the next thing we need to go and configure here for fuel pressure is going to be our filter. The filter right now is set to a value of 30. Anywhere between 30 to 50 is a good starting value. We want to make sure we're applying some type of Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.